My name is Eleanor Briggs, and I am 23 years old. I live on the Whitmore Plantation in Middle Tennessee, where the cotton fields stretch toward the horizon like an ocean of white that swallows everything: our backs, our voices, our names. The soil here is red clay, thick and heavy, staining everything it touches. In summer, the heat rises from the ground in waves that make the air shimmer like water. In winter, the cold seeps through the cracks in the cabin walls and settles in our bones. This land has drunk the sweat and blood of my people for generations, and it never gives anything back except more work, more pain, more reasons to bow our heads and keep silent. I was born here, on this same red earth, but I do not remember my first years. What I remember begins at 5 years old, the day they took me from my mother's arms and carried me to the big house to work in the kitchen. That moment lives in me like a scar that never healed, like a wound that bleeds fresh every single day. I can still feel her hands gripping my shoulders, her fingers digging into my flesh as if she could hold me through sheer force of will. I can still hear her voice breaking as she called my name. Eleanor. Eleanor, baby, no. Please, God, no. But Master Whitmore's overseer, a man named Carver with cold blue eyes and hands like iron, pulled me away. He lifted me like I weighed nothing, like I was a sack of grain or a piece of furniture being moved from one room to another. I looked back once. Just once. My mother's face was twisted in anguish, her mouth open in a scream I could no longer hear over my own crying. Her arms were reaching toward me, stretched out as if she could pull me back through the air, through the distance, through the invisible wall that was rising between us. Her head wrap had come loose, and her hair fell around her face in wild curls. There were tears streaming down her cheeks, and her whole body was shaking. That image burned itself into my mind with the precision of a brand on cattle hide. 18 years later, it has not dimmed. 18 years later, I can still see every detail. The way the morning sun caught the tears on her face, the way her bare feet were planted in the red dirt, the way her hands trembled as they reached for me. They kept me from my mother. That is the sin I cannot forgive, the wound that never stops bleeding, the theft that can never be repaid. 5 years old is too young to understand the full weight of loss, but old enough to feel it like a stone dropped into deep water, sinking and sinking with no bottom to catch it. I cried for days in that kitchen. I refused to eat. I would not speak to anyone. The cook, an older woman named Aunt Bess, tried to comfort me. She would stroke my hair and tell me stories, but I could not hear her through my grief. I wanted my mother. I wanted her arms, her voice, her smell, a mixture of field dirt and wood smoke and something sweet I could never name. I wanted the songs she used to hum while she worked, the way she would let me sleep curled against her body at night, the way she would call me, my heart, in the language her grandmother had taught her, words from across the ocean that had survived the journey in her family's memory. But wanting did not matter. Need did not matter. Love did not matter. What mattered was that Master Whitmore's wife needed another girl in the kitchen, and I was the right age, and my mother had no say in the matter. None at all. That is what it means to be enslaved. Your children are not your own. Your love is not your own. Your life is not your own. Everything belongs to someone else, and they can take it whenever they choose for whatever reason suits them, and you cannot stop them. You cannot even ask them to reconsider. You can only stand there with your arms outstretched and your heart breaking and watch as they carry away the person you love most in the world. I worked in the kitchen, learning to prepare meals for people who owned me, people who ate food I cooked with my small hands while my mother bent over cotton plants in fields I could see from the window. I would stand on a stool to reach the work table, and I would look out that window whenever I could, searching for her among the rows of workers. Sometimes I would see her, a distant figure, her back bent, her hands moving mechanically through the white bowls. I wanted to run to her. I wanted it so badly my whole body would ache with the wanting. But there were rules. There were always rules. Kitchen workers did not mix with field workers. Children did not decide when to see their mothers. Enslaved people did not choose anything at all. The rules were invisible but absolute, enforced by threat and violence and the constant knowledge that disobedience brought pain. At night, lying on my pallet in the corner of the kitchen house, I would whisper her name.
Dinah.
Dinah Briggs. I would say it like a prayer, like a spell, like a promise that I would not forget her, that I would not let them erase her from my heart. I memorized everything about her that I could remember from those first 5 years. The way she braided her hair in 3 thick plaits that hung down her back, the scar on her left forearm from a burning poker that had fallen on her when she was young, the gap between her 2 front teeth that showed when she smiled. I remembered the songs she sang, wordless melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep and old. I remembered the way she would cup my face in her hands and look at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. "My Eleanor," she would say, "my beautiful girl. You remember who you are, hear me? You remember you are loved." I held on to those memories like they were gold, like they were all that stood between me and complete darkness. Because in many ways, they were. The kitchen was not a gentle place. Aunt Bess ran it with efficiency and discipline, and there was no room for a grieving child to slow down the work. I learned quickly how to pluck a chicken, how to knead bread dough, how to keep a fire at exactly the right temperature for different kinds of cooking. I learned to move quietly, to anticipate what was needed before being asked, to make myself as invisible as possible. Invisibility was safety. Attention was danger. Mrs. Whitmore was a nervous, high-strung woman who startled easily and had a voice that could cut like a knife. She would sweep into the kitchen without warning, inspecting everything, finding fault with things that were perfectly fine, just so she could feel the power of correction. "This flour is lumpy, Eleanor. This butter is too soft. This bread is too dark. Must I teach you everything?" I learned to accept criticism without flinching, to say, "Yes, ma'am," in a voice that revealed nothing of what I felt inside. I learned to swallow anger, to bite back tears, to bury my real self so deep that sometimes I worried I might lose track of where I had hidden it. The other kitchen workers tried to be kind. Aunt Bess, despite her stern exterior, had a tender heart. She would sometimes touch my shoulder when no one was looking and say, "Your mama's strong, child. She thinking about you too. Don't you doubt that." There was also Lily, a girl a few years older than me, who would slip me extra food when she thought I looked too thin. And old Homer, who tended the kitchen garden, would sometimes leave flowers on my pallet. Wildflowers he picked from the edges of the property, bright spots of color in the grayness of my days. These small kindnesses mattered. They were proof that humanity could survive even here, even under these conditions. But kindness could not fill the emptiness where my mother should have been. Nothing could fill it. As I grew older, the ache did not diminish. It changed shape, became something I carried differently, but it never lessened. By the time I was 12, I had been in the kitchen for 7 years. 7 years of preparing food, serving meals, cleaning up after white people who barely saw me as human. 7 years of glimpsing my mother from a distance, but never being allowed to approach her. 7 years of living in the same small world, but existing in separate cages. I asked Mrs. Whitmore once if I could visit my mother on Sunday. I gathered all my courage and approached her while she was in the parlor, embroidering. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. "Ma'am," I said quietly. She looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Eleanor?" "Ma'am, I was wondering, on Sunday when there's no work in the kitchen, could I maybe visit my mother? Just for a little while." She stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Her needle paused in midair. "Your mother?" she said, and there was genuine confusion in her voice, as if she had forgotten I ever had one, as if I had simply appeared in her kitchen fully formed with no history, no family, no connections to anyone. "You have work to do here, Eleanor. The kitchen is always dirty. There's always something that needs attention. Don't be foolish." Foolish. That is what she called my longing. That is what they called love when it belonged to people like me. As if wanting to see my mother was a silly whim, a childish fantasy, something I should simply grow out of and forget. The years passed with a strange quality, too fast and too slow at the same time, like water flowing at different speeds in different parts of a river. I turned 15, then 18, then 20. My body changed, filling out with the curves of womanhood. My hands grew strong from work. My back learned to bend without breaking. My face learned to hide everything I felt. But the ache inside me remained exactly the same. It did not mature or evolve. It stayed raw and immediate, a 5-year-old's grief frozen in time, preserved perfectly in the center of my chest. Every Sunday, when some of the field workers were allowed to rest near the creek, I would imagine my mother there. I would picture myself walking down the path, past the barn, through the field, down to the water's edge. I would imagine seeing her sitting on a rock, maybe cooling her feet in the water, maybe talking with other women. In my mind, I would walk up to her and simply say her name, Mama. And she would turn around, and for a moment she would not recognize me, because I had grown so much. But then something in my face would click into place, and her eyes would go wide, and she would stand up so fast she would nearly fall. "Eleanor," she would say. "Eleanor, is that really you?" And I would nod, and she would pull me into her arms and hold me so tight I could barely breathe, and she would say, "My baby, my heart, I never stopped thinking about you, not for one single day." This fantasy sustained me through countless difficult days. I would replay it in my mind while I kneaded bread, while I scrubbed pots, while I served meals to people who did not deserve to be served. But it remained only a fantasy. I never went to the creek on Sundays. The big house kept me tethered. There were always meals to prepare, tables to set, silver to polish. Mrs. Whitmore grew more demanding as she aged, her voice growing sharper, her expectations becoming more impossible. "Eleanor, the gravy is too thin. Eleanor, the biscuits are too hard. Eleanor, the roast is overdone. Eleanor, must I teach you everything again and again?" I bit my tongue so many times I am surprised it is still whole and functional. I learned to swallow anger like medicine, bitter and burning on the way down, leaving a residue that built up in my stomach like sediment at the bottom of a river. I also learned what it meant to be a young woman on this plantation. I watched and I learned, and I protected myself as best I could. I saw how Master Whitmore looked at some of the young women who worked in the house, a lingering gaze that made my skin crawl, an attention that was predatory and possessive. I saw how some of them would be called to his study after dinner, and I saw how they would come out later with their eyes empty and their faces carefully blank. I saw their babies born 9 months later, babies with skin lighter than their mother's, babies with features that echoed the master's face, babies that everyone pretended not to notice or understand. The silence around these things was thick and suffocating. I kept my head down. I made myself as plain as possible. I bound my hair tight under my head wrap, wore my oldest and least flattering dress, hunched my shoulders to hide my figure. I became a ghost in that house, fading into the wallpaper, blending into the furniture. And being a ghost kept me safe. Master Whitmore's eyes passed over me without catching, without lingering. I was grateful for this invisibility, even as I hated what it said about the world we lived in. That safety for women like me required erasure, required making ourselves so small and unnoticeable that we cease to exist as human beings with bodies and desires and the right to control what happened to us. But through all of this, the work, the survival, the careful navigation of danger, the longing for my mother never left. It grew instead, spreading through me like roots through soil, becoming part of my fundamental structure. I began to have dreams about her. In some dreams, she was sick, calling for me from a bed I could not reach. In others, she was in danger, and I was trying to run to her, but my legs would not move. In the worst dreams, she was dead, and I had not been there to hold her hand, to tell her I loved her, to close her eyes gently and sing her into the next world. I would wake from these dreams gasping, my face wet with tears, my body shaking. Aunt Bess would hear me sometimes and come sit beside me in the dark, her presence a comfort even without words. One day, when I was 20 years old, Aunt Bess brought me news. She had been to the trading post with the overseer to purchase supplies, and she had seen my mother there. She asked about you. Aunt Bess told me quietly while we were preparing dinner. She wanted to know if you were well, if you were being treated okay, if you remembered her. My hands stilled in the bowl of dough I was mixing. My heart felt like it had stopped beating and then started again too fast. What did you tell her? I whispered. I told her you were well. I told her you were a good worker and you stayed out of trouble. I told her. Aunt Bess paused, her voice catching. I told her you asked about her too, that you never forgot her. Tears spilled down my cheeks and fell into the dough. Aunt Bess reached over and squeezed my hand, getting flour all over both of us. That information should have comforted me, but it only made the longing worse. She asked about me. She remembered me. She wanted to know about my life, my health, my well-being. And I had not been there to answer her myself. We had been so close, just a few miles apart, close enough that on quiet nights I could probably have heard her voice if she had called out to me. But we might as well have been on different continents, separated by an ocean of rules and power and violence that kept us apart more effectively than any physical distance could have. When I was 21, something inside me began to shift. It started small, like a crack in a dam, and then slowly widened. I was serving dinner one evening to Master Whitmore and several of his friends, men from neighboring plantations who had come to discuss politics and cotton prices and other matters that shaped their world while we remained invisible fixtures in the background. I moved around the table silently, refilling glasses, removing plates, bringing new courses. They talked as if we were not there, as if we were pieces of furniture with no ears, no understanding, no ability to think or feel or judge what we heard. These people have no real attachments, Master Whitmore was saying, cutting into his roast beef with confidence. Not the way we do. They move on quickly from losses. It's simply in their nature. They're more like animals in that way. They feel things in the moment, but they don't have the depth of emotion that we have. His friend nodded sagely. Exactly right. My overseer tells me the same thing. You can separate a mother and child, and within a week, they've both forgotten about it and moved on to other concerns. I stood there, holding a pitcher of water, and something cracked open in my chest. Something that had been compressed for 16 years suddenly expanded and filled me with a heat that was part rage and part clarity. No real attachments. I thought of my mother's face as they pulled me away from her, the animal sound that had come from her throat, her arms reaching for me as I disappeared from view. I thought of 16 years of whispering her name in the dark, 16 years of searching for her figure in the distant fields, 16 years of carrying her memory like a flame I protected against every wind that tried to extinguish it. No real attachments. I thought of every night I had cried myself to sleep, every dream where I had tried to reach her, Every moment I had wondered if she was hungry or cold or in pain. They move on quickly. Standing there in that dining room, surrounded by crystal and silver and the smell of roasted meat, I understood something fundamental that I had never been able to articulate before. These men needed to believe we felt less than they did. They needed to tell themselves this lie because the truth, that we loved as deeply and grieved as completely and suffered as intensely as any human being on earth, would make their actions monstrous. If they acknowledged that a mother torn from her child feels exactly what any mother would feel, if they admitted that our hearts broke the same way their hearts would break under the same circumstances, then they would have to face what they were doing. They would have to call it by its true name. That night, I could not sleep. I lay on my pallet staring at the ceiling, feeling something new moving through me, something that felt like awakening, like transformation. For 16 years, I had survived by being small, by accepting my powerlessness, by telling myself that someday things might change, but until then I just had to endure. But that night, I began to question that strategy. What was I surviving for? What was I preserving myself for? If I died tomorrow without ever seeing my mother again, without ever telling her that I had kept my promise, that I had remembered everything, that I had never stopped being her daughter, what would my survival have been worth? The next morning, I made a decision. I had one day off each month, the first Sunday, when Mrs. Whitmore went to her sister's house and took most of the house servants with her. Usually, I spent that day resting, mending clothes, helping in the garden. But this coming Sunday, I would use it differently. I would go find my mother. I did not know exactly where the field quarters were, but I knew the general direction. I would go and I would search until I found her. And if I was caught and punished, so be it. At least I would have tried. At least I would not die with this weight of longing still sitting on my chest, crushing the breath out of me. When Sunday came, I woke before dawn. My hands shook as I splashed water on my face and tied my head wrap. I wrapped a piece of cornbread and some dried meat in a cloth and tucked it into my pocket. I did not know how long I would be gone. Then I slipped out of the kitchen house into the gray pre-dawn light. The world was quiet except for birdsong and the distant sound of the creek. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone on the plantation must be able to hear it. I walked quickly, keeping to the edges of the property where trees provided cover. I knew that if the overseer or the patrollers saw me, I would have to have a story ready. I was looking for medicinal herbs, I was checking the garden fence, I was doing any number of things that might sound plausible. But I hoped to avoid being seen at all. The field quarters were about a mile away, a cluster of rough cabins where the field workers lived in cramped, miserable conditions. I had never been there before. It was another rule. House servants and field workers were kept separate, divided by the master's belief that proximity might lead to solidarity, and solidarity might lead to resistance. As I approached the quarters, I saw a few people beginning to stir. An old man was sitting outside one cabin, smoking a pipe. A woman was drawing water from the well. I approached her, my throat tight with nervousness. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I'm looking for Dinah Briggs. Do you know her?" The woman looked at me with surprise, taking in my house servant clothes. Then her expression softened. "You must be Eleanor," she said. "You look just like her. She talks about you." My eyes filled with tears.
"She talks about me."
"Where can I find her?" The woman pointed to a cabin at the far end. "She shares that one with 3 other women, but I don't think she's there right now. I saw her heading toward the creek about 10 minutes ago. She likes to go there early, before the day gets hot." I thanked her and turned toward the creek, my heart racing. After 16 years, I was about to see my mother. I was about to stand in front of her and speak to her and touch her. The reality of it made me dizzy. What would I say? What if she did not recognize me? What if she was angry that I had not come sooner? What if I forced myself to stop these thoughts? None of it mattered. I just needed to see her. I found her sitting on a flat rock near the water's edge, her feet bare, her skirt pulled up to her knees. She was looking at the creek, watching the water flow past, and she seemed lost in thought. Her hair was mostly gray now, her face lined with years of sun and work. But I would have known her anywhere. The shape of her shoulders, the way she held her head, the profile of her face, these things were as familiar to me as my own body, preserved perfectly in my memory despite the passage of time. I stood there for a moment, just looking at her, hardly able to believe this was real. Then I took a step forward, and a twig snapped under my foot. She turned quickly, startled, and our eyes met. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I saw confusion in her face, then recognition dawning slowly, like sunrise. Her hand came up to her mouth. "Eleanor," she whispered, "is that you?" "Yes, Mama," I said, and my voice broke on the word. "It's me." She stood up so fast she nearly fell, and then she was moving toward me, and I was moving toward her, and then we were in each other's arms, and both of us were crying and holding each other, so tightly it hurt. She smelled different than I remembered, more of field dirt and less of kitchen smoke. But underneath that was something familiar, something that my body recognized before my mind did. She was shorter than me now. I had grown tall while she had perhaps shrunk a bit with age and hardship. But none of that mattered. I was holding my mother, and she was holding me, and 16 years of separation were momentarily erased by this contact. "My baby," she kept saying, over and over. "My Eleanor, my heart, I can't believe you're here. I can't believe I'm touching you." Her hands moved over my face, my shoulders, my arms, as if she was making sure I was real, making sure she was not dreaming. "Let me look at you. Oh, you're so beautiful. You're so grown. You're a woman now." Tears streamed down her face, and she made no effort to wipe them away. We sat down on the rock together, still holding hands, neither of us willing to break physical contact. There was so much to say that at first neither of us could speak. The words were too big, too many, too weighted with years of silence. Finally, she squeezed my hands and said, "Tell me about your life. Tell me everything. Are they treating you well? Are you eating enough? Are you?" She paused, her face darkening. "Has anyone hurt you?" I understood what she was asking. "No, Mama," I said. "I've been careful. I made myself invisible. No one bothered me that way." Relief flooded her face. "Thank God. Thank God. That's been my biggest fear all these years. Worse than imagining you hungry or cold, imagining you being hurt like that." She touched my face again. "You look tired though. You look like you carry a heavy weight." "I miss you," I said simply. "Every single day. That's the weight I carry. Being apart from you." She closed her eyes, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know, baby. I know. It's the same for me. Sometimes I think about that day they took you, and it's like it just happened yesterday. I can still hear you crying for me. I can still feel your hands slipping out of mine." She opened her eyes and looked at me with such intensity, it was almost frightening. "I want you to know something, Eleanor. I want you to know that every single day, when I'm in those fields picking cotton until my back feels like it's going to break, when the sun is so hot I can barely breathe, when the overseer is yelling and threatening, when everything hurts and I'm so tired I could just lie down in the dirt and never get up, every single day, I think about you. And thinking about you gives me a reason to survive one more day. Because maybe, just maybe, I'll see you again. Maybe I'll get to hold you again before I die." "Mama," I whispered, crying harder now. "I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. I wanted to so badly. But "Hush now," she said, pulling me against her shoulder. "You don't apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for. This is not your fault. This is not your doing. They did this to us. They're the ones who should be sorry." We sat there by the creek for what must have been an hour, though it felt both like no time at all and like an eternity. She told me about her life in the fields, about the women she lived with, about how her back hurt constantly now, and her hands were so calloused she could barely feel with her fingertips anymore. She told me about how she prayed every night, asking God to watch over me, to keep me safe, to help me remember that I was loved. She told me about the songs she used to sing to me when I was a baby, how she still hummed it sometimes when she was working, and how it made the other women smile because they knew what it meant. It was her way of staying connected to me across the distance. I told her about the kitchen, about Aunt Bess who had tried to be kind to me, about learning to cook and clean and make myself useful. I told her about standing at the window and searching for her in the fields. I told her about whispering her name at night, about the dreams I had where I was trying to reach her. I told her about the conversation I had overheard about Master Whitmore saying we had no real attachments and how it had made me understand that I needed to see her, that I could not live my whole life with this gaping wound in the center of my being. "They want to believe we don't love like they do," my mother said, her voice hard. "Because if they admitted we do, they'd have to admit what they're doing to us. They'd have to look at themselves in the mirror and see monsters." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that I would remember for the rest of my life. "But our love is our own, Eleanor. It's the one thing they can't take from us, no matter how hard they try. They can separate our bodies, but they can't separate our hearts. They can keep us from seeing each other, but they can't make us stop thinking about each other. As long as I'm alive, I'm your mother. As long as you're alive, you're my daughter. And nothing they do can change that." I leaned against her, feeling her warmth, her solidity, her realness. This moment was a gift, precious and fragile. I knew it could not last. I knew that soon I would have to go back to the big house, back to the kitchen, back to my life of servitude. And she would have to go back to the fields, back to the endless rows of cotton, back to the overseer's whip and the sun's brutal heat. But this moment existed, and nothing could erase it. We had found each other again. We had spoken and touched and confirmed what we had both always known. Our bond was unbreakable. "Mama," I said, "I promise I'll come back.
I'll find ways to see you."
Maybe not often, but whenever I can. I won't let another 16 years pass." She kissed my forehead. "I'll be here, baby. Whenever you can come, I'll be here. And on the days you can't come, I'll still be here, thinking about you, loving you, proud of you." We heard voices in the distance. Other people were waking up, beginning their day. We both knew our time was running out. I needed to get back before my absence was noticed. She needed to prepare for work in the fields. We stood up together, neither of us wanting to let go. Finally, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of cloth, faded blue with white stitching. "I made this for you when you were born," she said. "I've kept it all these years. I was saving it to give to you if I ever saw you again." She pressed it into my hand. "Take it. Keep it. And when you look at it, remember that you were wanted, you were loved, you were celebrated. You came into this world surrounded by love, even if they've tried to steal that from us since." I looked at the cloth through my tears. The stitching formed a clumsy flower and a single letter, E for Eleanor. "I'll keep it forever," I promised. "I'll keep it close to my heart." We embraced one more time, holding each other as if we could store up enough touch to last through the separation ahead. Then, with effort that felt like tearing my own skin off, I stepped back. "I love you, Mama," I said. "I love you so much." "I love you too, my Eleanor. More than you'll ever know." I walked away, forcing myself not to look back because I knew if I did, I would not be able to leave. I walked back through the quarters, past the well, past the cabins, back toward the big house where another day of servitude waited for me.
But I was changed.
The emptiness that had lived in me for 16 years was still there, but it was different now. It had been filled, at least partially, with this morning's reunion. I had my mother's words in my mind, her cloth pressed against my heart, her love confirmed and renewed.
The next few months were different. I still worked in the kitchen, still served meals to people who saw me as property rather than human. But I carried my mother's words with me like armor. Our love is our own. They can't take that from us. When Mrs. Whitmore criticized me, when Master Whitmore spoke about enslaved people as if we were animals, when the work seemed endless and the days stretched out like punishment, I thought about my mother by the creek, about her hands holding mine, about her voice saying my name. And I survived. I went back to see her twice more over the next several months, stealing Sunday mornings when I could, taking enormous risks each time. The second visit was shorter. We had only about 20 minutes before we heard the overseer coming, and she had to rush back to her cabin. But even 20 minutes was precious. The third visit, we had nearly an hour, and we spent it talking about everything and nothing. Her memories of her own mother, my memories of growing up in the kitchen, the small victories we had each won in our daily battles to maintain our humanity in a system designed to strip it away. But then something happened that shattered everything. I was in the kitchen one evening, about 6 months after our first reunion, preparing dinner for a party Mrs. Whitmore was hosting. The house was full of guests, and there was more work than usual. I was focused on making sure the roast was cooked perfectly when I heard Mrs. Whitmore's sister in the parlor, her voice carrying through the open door. I heard Whitmore's reducing his field hands, she was saying to another guest. Some trader from Memphis bought a group of them last week. He's taking them to the deep south, Louisiana, I think. Better cotton prices down there, apparently. My hands froze in the act of basting the roast. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I moved closer to the door, pretending to arrange dishes on a sideboard, straining to hear more. Really, the guest said. How many did he sell? Oh, 10 or 12, I believe, including some of the older women who can't work as fast as they used to. It makes sense from a business perspective. Better to sell them while they still have some value rather than waiting until they're completely used up. I felt dizzy. Older women who can't work as fast. My mother was in her 40s now, her back permanently bent from years of labor, her hands gnarled, her movements slower than they used to be. No. Please, God, no. Let it be someone else. Let it be anyone else. I finished preparing the dinner mechanically, my mind racing. As soon as the guests sat down to eat and I was released from serving duty, I slipped out of the house. I ran through the darkness toward the field quarters, not caring if I was seen, not caring about anything except finding out if it was true. I found the same woman I had spoken to before, the one who had pointed me toward my mother that first morning. Please, I said, out of breath. Dinah Briggs. Is she still here? Was she one of the ones sold? The woman's face told me everything before she spoke. I'm sorry, child. She was sold 3 days ago. The trader took them all away in a wagon. They're heading toward Memphis, then down the river. Down the river. The words that every enslaved person dreaded. Down the river meant the deep south, meant sugar plantations, meant dying young in the worst conditions imaginable. My legs gave out beneath me, and I fell to my knees in the dirt. The woman knelt beside me, her hand on my shoulder, but I could not hear what she was saying. All I could hear was a roaring in my ears, like the sound of the world ending. 3 days ago. She had been gone for 3 days, and I had not known. I had been in the kitchen, preparing food, serving meals, going through the motions of my life, while my mother was being carried away in chains. I had not said goodbye. I had not held her one more time. I had not told her that our 3 brief meetings had been the most precious moments of my life. She was gone, and I would never see her again. Never hear her voice. Never feel her hands holding mine. Never listen to her tell me that I was loved, that I was her heart, that nothing they did could change who we were to each other. The woman helped me to my feet and walked me back toward the big house. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry." But sorry could not bring my mother back. Sorry could not undo the sale. Sorry could not bridge the hundreds of miles that would soon separate us, the impossible distance between Tennessee and Louisiana, between the living and those we have lost. I made it back to the kitchen house and collapsed on my pallet. I did not cry at first. The grief was too big for tears. It sat on my chest like a boulder, crushing the air out of my lungs. I lay there in the dark, staring at nothing, feeling like my body had been torn in half. How was I supposed to survive this? How was I supposed to wake up tomorrow and continue living knowing that my mother was being taken farther away from me with every passing moment, that she was probably suffering, probably thinking about me, probably wondering if I knew she was gone? I did not sleep that night. I lay awake, feeling something inside me break and then reform into something harder, something sharper. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. I could not save my mother. I could not bring her back, but I could honor her. I could live in a way that proved everything she had taught me, everything she had told me by the creek. They had taken her body away from me, but they could not take her love. They could not erase what she had given me, and I would not let them. For the next several days, I moved through my work like a ghost. Aunt Bess knew something had happened, but she did not press me to talk about it. She simply stayed close, her presence a silent comfort. I went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, serving, but my mind was somewhere else. I was thinking about my mother on that wagon, in that car full of enslaved people chained together. I was thinking about her looking back toward Tennessee, toward the place where her daughter remained. I was thinking about her touching the place on her dress where she had kept the blue cloth before giving it to me, finding it gone, and remembering that she had given me a piece of herself to carry forward. One morning, about a week after learning she was gone, I was drawing water from the well when I met an old man named Samuel. He was a field worker who sometimes did repairs around the big house. He looked at me with kind, knowing eyes and said quietly, "You're Dinah's girl, aren't you? Eleanor." I nodded, my throat tight. "I heard what happened," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your mama was a good woman. Strong, dignified." He paused, then added, "There's a man who might be able to help you. A free black man named Moses Turner. He works as a carter, travels between here and Nashville. Sometimes he carries messages between separated families. It's dangerous work, but he does it anyway. He'll be at the Crossroads Market in 2 days. If you could get there, you might be able to send word to your mother before she's taken too far away." Hope flared in my chest, painful and desperate. How would I get there? I can't just leave. Samuel looked around to make sure no one was listening. "That's for you to figure out, child. I'm just telling you the possibility exists. What you do with it is up to you." He walked away, leaving me standing there with my bucket of water and a sudden, fierce determination. I spent the rest of that day and the next planning. I needed an excuse to go to the market, and I needed it to seem natural, necessary, unavoidable. Finally, I approached Aunt Bess and told her everything about my mother being sold, about Moses Turner, about the chance to send a message. She listened in silence, her face grave. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "Child, you know what you're asking could get us both whipped. Maybe worse." "I know," I said. "But Aunt Bess, I have to try. I can't let her disappear without telling her, without her knowing that I'm thinking about her, that I love her, that I'll never forget her. Please. Aunt Bess looked at me for a long time, and I saw something shift in her eyes, a recognition, a memory, a pain that mirrored my own. I had a daughter once, she said quietly. She was sold away when she was 7. I never saw her again. That was 30 years ago, and I still see her face every night before I sleep. I still wonder if she remembers me, if she knows I loved her, if she's even still alive. She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. I'll help you, Eleanor, for your mama, and for my Susie, wherever she is.
The plan was simple, but risky. On market day, Aunt Bess would tell Mrs. Whitmore that we needed special spices for an important dinner party, spices that the overseer had forgotten to purchase. She would insist that I needed to go because I was the only one who knew exactly what the French recipes required, what the spices should smell like, how to tell if they were fresh. It was thin, but Mrs. Whitmore was particular about her dinner parties and vain about her reputation as a hostess. If Aunt Bess played it right, she might agree. When the day came, I woke with my heart already racing. I dressed carefully, bound my hair neatly, tried to make my face calm even though I felt like I was vibrating with anxiety. Aunt Bess began her performance at breakfast, fussing loudly about the dinner menu, complaining about the overseer's incompetence, working herself up into a state of theatrical distress. How am I supposed to prepare coq au vin without proper herbs? How am I supposed to make ratatouille without fresh thyme? Your dinner party will be ruined, ma'am. Absolutely ruined. Mrs. Whitmore, already nervous about the party, grew increasingly agitated. Well, what are we supposed to do about it? She snapped. Send Eleanor to the market, Aunt Bess said firmly. She knows what we need. She's seen me use these things. She'll know if they're the right quality. Mrs. Whitmore hesitated, and I held my breath. Fine, she said finally, waving her hand dismissively. But be back by noon, Eleanor. If you're late, there will be consequences. I walked those 5 miles faster than I had ever walked in my life. The morning was cool, and mist hung in the low places. My feet barely touched the ground. I was terrified and hopeful in equal measure, my emotions swinging wildly between dread and desperate optimism. What if Moses Turner was not there? What if he refused to help me? What if he demanded payment I could not afford? But I pushed these thoughts away and focused on moving forward, on getting to the market, on doing this one thing that might allow me to reach my mother across the distance that separated us. The Crossroads market was busy when I arrived, full of people buying and selling, talking and haggling. I searched desperately through the crowd, looking for a tall man with a scar across his eyebrow, driving a wagon with a red wheel. Finally, I found him near the back of the market, loading sacks of grain. Mr. Turner? I approached carefully, my voice shaking. Samuel sent me. I'm Eleanor Briggs. My mother is Dinah Briggs. She was sold last week, and they're taking her to Louisiana. I need to get a message to her. Please. He looked at me sharply, assessing me with intelligent eyes. He took in my house servant clothes, my desperate expression, the way I was trembling. Then he nodded slowly. I know the Koffel, he said. I saw them pass through Nashville 3 days ago. They're moving slow, the traders stopping at various plantations, trying to sell off individuals for better prices before he takes the rest south. I might be able to catch them before they leave Tennessee, but it's risky, and I can't promise anything.
Please, I said.
I'll give you whatever I have. I reached into the hem of my dress, where I had hidden the few coins I had managed to save over the years, pennies and nickels collected from tips, from finding coins dropped by careless white people, from tiny acts of theft so small they would never be noticed. It was not much, maybe $2 total, but it was everything I had. I held it out to him. Moses Turner looked at the coins in my palm, and something softened in his face. "Keep your money," he said gently. "I do this because it needs to be done. Because people like your mama need to know they're not forgotten."
He paused.
What do you want me to tell her? What did I want to say? How could I fit everything I felt into words that could be carried by a stranger? How could I compress a lifetime of love into a message short enough to remember? I closed my eyes and thought about my mother by the creek, about her hands holding mine, about her voice saying my name. Then I opened my eyes and spoke. Tell her that Eleanor remembers everything. Tell her I remember the song she sang, the way she held me, the sound of her voice calling me my heart. Tell her I never stopped loving her, not for one single day. Tell her that the 3 times I saw her by the creek were the most precious moments of my life. Tell her. My voice broke, but I forced myself to continue. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't save her. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't protect her from this. But tell her that I'm carrying her with me. Tell her that I'm going to survive, and I'm going to live in a way that honors everything she taught me. Tell her that when I whisper her name at night, I'm praying for her. Tell her that our love is our own, and they can't take it from us. Tell her that as long as I'm alive, she's my mother and nothing can change that. Moses Turner's eyes were wet. He nodded seriously. I'll tell her, girl, word for word. And if she has a message back, where can I find you? We arranged to meet again in 3 days at the same spot. I would have to create another excuse, take another risk, but it would be worth it for the chance to hear my mother's words. I bought the spices quickly and hurried back to the plantation, arriving just before noon. Mrs. Whitmore barely glanced at me. Aunt Bess squeezed my hand in the kitchen, asking no questions, but offering silent support. The next 3 days passed like years, each hour stretching out endlessly. When the appointed day came, I used the same excuse, more ingredients needed. Only I could select them properly. Mrs. Whitmore was annoyed but agreed. I practically ran to the crossroads market, my heart in my throat. Moses Turner was there, and when he saw me, he climbed down from his wagon with a careful, gentle expression that told me he had found her. I found her, he said, and those 3 words made the world stop spinning. I gripped the wagon wheel to steady myself, my legs suddenly weak. She's in a holding pen outside Memphis. The trader's planning to take them on a steamboat down the Mississippi in 2 days. I talked to her through the fence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the blue cloth, the one I had given my mother by the creek. Only now, there was new stitching on it, a second flower, done in red thread, and below it, carefully formed letters, DB. My mother had stitched her own initials next to mine. She wanted you to have this back, Moses said. She said it should stay with you, so you always have a piece of her. She said she doesn't need cloth to remember you. You're written on her heart. He paused, emotion thickening his voice. And she gave me a message. She said, tell my Eleanor that I love her more than life itself. Tell her that knowing she exists, knowing she's in the world, knowing she's thinking about me, that's what keeps me breathing. Tell her not to grieve too much. Tell her to live. Tell her to find joy where she can, to hold on to beauty, to remember that this life is not all there is. Tell her that someday, whether in this world or the next, we'll see each other again. Tell her that a mother's love doesn't end with distance or death. Tell her that I'm proud of her. Tell her that every moment I spent with her was a gift. Tell her that she saved me just as much as I tried to save her. Tell her that love is stronger than chains. And tell her that she must survive, because her survival is my revenge against everyone who tried to break us. I pressed the cloth to my face and let myself cry, deep, wrenching sobs that came from the very bottom of my soul. Moses stood quietly, giving me space for my grief, and my love all tangled together. When I finally looked up, I managed to whisper, "Thank you. Thank you for giving us this." He nodded. "I wish I could do more, but she'll be on that boat in 2 days, and after that." He did not finish the sentence.
He did not need to.
We both understood. Louisiana was too far, too different, too final. This was likely the last message I would ever receive from my mother. I walked back to the plantation as the sun climbed higher, turning the sky bright and merciless. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and somehow also filled with something that felt like strength. My mother's words echoed in my mind. Her survival is my revenge. I understood what she meant. Every day I continued to live. Every moment I refused to let them break my spirit. Every time I held on to love and dignity and humanity, that was resistance. That was victory. I still worked in the kitchen. I was still enslaved. My mother was being taken to Louisiana, to conditions that might kill her within a year. I would probably never see her again in this life. But they had not succeeded in their deepest goal. They had not made us love each other less. They had not convinced us we were less than human. They had not broken the bond between mother and daughter. That evening, as I prepared supper, I hummed the song my mother used to sing. "Hush, little one, hush now." Aunt Bess heard me and smiled through her tears. She understood. We both did. Love was the thing they could not take. Love was the weapon they did not expect. Love was how we would survive them. I am Eleanor Briggs, daughter of Dinah Briggs, and no one can take that truth from me. They kept me from my mother's physical presence for most of my life. They sold her away to a place I will never reach. But they could not keep me from her love, and they could not keep her from mine. In that, they failed completely. And in that failure lies my freedom, invisible but unbreakable, carried in the stitching of a blue cloth and the whispered name that will never fade from my lips.